Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you about the Burmese-made handicrafts that are nonprofit sources from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar. These lovely crafts bring the life and color of Myanmar to the world. More importantly, their purchase assists the artists and their families, while also going on to support our ongoing humanitarian and media missions. Please take a moment to visit our shop at alokacrafts.com. That's ALOKACRAFTS.com.
Thanks for inviting me. My name is Dragos Badita. I'm a visual artist from Romania. And I traveled in Myanmar a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I have a few things to talk about and learn from your journeys there and some of the perspectives and insights you had from your experiences. So to give some background to our audience, you're a meditator. You've meditated in different Theravadan traditions such as Pa Auk and Utejaniya and Ajahn Chah. And so you came to Myanmar partly to want to learn more about the Buddhist life and meditation teachers there, but you're also an artist. And so as you were there for the more meditative aspect, you were also in perhaps classic style of the old seafarers and voyagers that used to go before our current technology. You would create sketches of daily life happening around you. And so talk a bit about these two backgrounds, about your background as a meditator and your background as an artist, and how these came together in your trip to Myanmar.
Yeah, so as a meditator, I started maybe 15 years ago to meditate gradually. In the beginning, less intense, but then I started going in retreats. And in Romania, there have been some very good retreats in Ajahn Chah tradition with teachers invited from Great Britain. And it was very important experience for me, and I learned a lot from that. And I really dreamed of going someday to see how Buddhism and meditation teachings are at their home, in their home.
Mm-hmm.
And and my plan was like to travel maybe for 2 or 3 months in both Thailand and Myanmar. And the idea was to make 1 month a retreat in one of these countries, and then 1 month just traveling to different cities and more like a cultural trip then, maybe not so much nature, but I also want to like nature a lot. And I chose in the end Myanmar for going in a retreat because I had some problem with the visa in Thailand. I just could obtain only for 2 weeks and then another 2 weeks, but I didn't want to fragment the time.
Right.
I researched a lot. Where should I go? What monastery in Myanmar to go? And I wanted to try a bit. I felt that I needed a bit more concentration and in my practice. And I read a bit about the Pa Auk tradition, and it kind of resonated with me. The way it's kind of quite maybe stage oriented and very clear method maybe, and also they had this kind of way of teaching gradually. You have to really learn concentration first and then go to insight. Yeah, and I can tell a bit more about the experience at the monastery, but with the drawing and art, artistic part, usually when I travel, I don't have so much time to make some works to draw. But when I went in Thailand and Myanmar, I really wanted to focus on this a lot because
Hmm.
and to take my time to make sketches and to because I think it's a very good way of um, sitting more time, getting more time in one place, and kind of really soaking the experience and the people, and really paying attention to what's happening. Because if you have to draw something, you really have to be very attentive. And
Hmm.
in a way, it's also this is kind of a meditative practice to
Hmm.
draw, and even for people that are not artists, I think it's very useful to just sit and and really look at something. And it was also a very nice way, a nice way to interact with people, because people were seeing that I'm drawing them maybe in some temple and were asking me, and I showed them other drawings, and it was a nice way to interact, to meet people, and yeah, and in the end, I had quite maybe I had 200 drawings
Hmm.
from this trip, and in different cities, even monasteries. In the retreat, I tried not to draw so much.
Hmm.
I only in the last 2 days I did some drawings, but and yeah, and now when I look back at them, I really remember very clearly the places and
Hmm.
the stories behind them. I may much more so than if I take just photos. Or it's a very nice way to just keep the memories and reconnect with the place.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask. And in what ways do you find that the experience of choosing to draw something and then drawing it and then coming back and look at that later, in what ways is that different from a photograph?
First of all, because it takes time to draw, and you really have to concentrate and pay a lot of attention and to really be present in that moment. Because you can snap a
Mm.
photo and then just forget about it, but
Hmm.
with the drawing, you can just have to look at details and to see many more things than you would otherwise. And yeah, that sticks with you. It sticks in your memory, and it's. It's a way of looking maybe more objectively, like you're just trying to draw what you see, and then you look after interesting things like
Mm.
scenes with people that you find inspiring, or some element of architecture, or an old sculpture that is half broken, or yeah, maybe scenes from daily life. Mm,
How long does it
so
take you on average to complete a sketch?
It was quite fast actually, maybe 5 minutes, ten
Oh,
minutes.
okay. Right.
Depends on how detailed it is. Maybe 20 minutes if it's much more complicated. But usually, I mean, usually if I drew people, I had to be fast because they are moving a
Mm.
lot. People don't sit still, and yeah. And now I wanted to publish this book to make a book out of these drawings. Hopefully we'll manage to do so.
Right. And did you have experiences where you were choosing to sketch something and you saw a scene or a person or a physical object and you thought, okay, I'll go and sketch this, and then as you're sketching it, you actually you realize something that you didn't realize when you started out sketching it, that some detail or some feature that you realize that what you thought you saw first was not what was actually there, or there was actually something deeper there that the process of sketching and looking and sketching and looking brought out in ways that just the initial glance didn't.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Mm.
it happens maybe sometimes with just small things. You just notice maybe some person has a strange posture or
Mm.
keeps the hand in some interesting way that you didn't notice before. Or just noticing many details. Like there are this sculpture also in Thailand, but also in Myanmar, with very detailed, like ornamentations, and
Hmm.
if you actually try to do them, it's very complicated. It's very intricate and very well done. But if you just take a glance, it's not. It's just a sculpture. But and also the temples, they're so the structure is so uh, complex, and every portion of it has some meaning, and someone
Hmm.
put a lot of thought in considering that part. And yeah, start noticing many things like that.
And in terms of the technique and the detail that you learn to be able to sketch, is there a certain name of the type of sketch you're doing, or influences, or where did you learn how to do these kind of sketches?
Well, I did the University of Arts, and we did a lot of studies after a model or after different subjects, and you just exercise, a lot of exercise, and this kind of sketch is a bit more free. It's like a croquis, and it's more spontaneous maybe than just a normal study.
Hmm.
But and I had some kind of ink pen that is really. It looks a bit like a brush, and it has this interesting line, like sinuous line, and it's nice to play with it, to maybe just suggest depth with some line is thicker than other, and you can suggest depth with that. But it's quite spontaneous, actually. It's quite fresh. And
Right. Yeah. Did you? I wonder how much of an awareness you had about the old days of travel. I referenced this at the beginning of the talk, and especially when you think of some of the seafaring nations that would go and explore the New World, especially the European countries, they would always have sketch artists that would be sketching the people and the botany and the animals and landscape and everything else, and that would come back and inform the world that they came from, of a world that was unknown, that these were the first glimpses of it. And they all came through these kind of sketch work. This was a medium and profession that really defined that era that we don't see so much anymore. uh, in the sketches you do, to what degree were you aware of the history of how what these sketch artists would do when they would travel to new parts of the world, and in what ways did you see the work that you were doing in some kind of line of this tradition?
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I know this tradition, and yeah, but I actually didn't think about that very consciously, about being in kind of in line with that. I thought a bit more like a personal project that was not necessarily kind of at that point. I didn't think of it as like a documentary value, or kind of
Hmm.
documenting the culture I was encountering. But now when I look back at it is in a way. I mean, some of them have some more value, uh, like that. It's connected. Yeah, and yeah, uh, but now I think, yeah, maybe it's not the. Hmm, I don't know what to say. It's like, mm, I think compared to maybe other mediums like photography and documentary, they have, you can say that it's more objective to
Hmm.
to make a video documentary than like a personal view. But on the other hand, like a personal vision has maybe more. You can go in places where maybe it's not so easy to make photographs.
Hmm.
Like monastery.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
not, and you can have like a more patient look. Like sit more and stay more in one place, and just let the place inspire you more than maybe just through a video documentation, which needs equipment. It's difficult to set up. So yeah, I think it has some value in that way, like a documentary value. Yeah.
Concerning your time in monasteries, I mean, that's a really interesting point, that the monastery life has a slower flow, more less distractions, or at least it should. In some Myanmar monasteries these days, that's certainly not the case. They can be quite active, socially engaged places. But the types of meditation and remote monasteries that you were going to, they certainly had a slower pace of life and less distractions and more digesting and processing what you were doing as you were doing it. And so it's very interesting that the process of sketching and the reflection and the mindfulness of the slow process of recording some feature of life around you also kind of mirrored and supported the protocol and the rhythms of life at that monastery to begin with. Thinking back to some of the sketches that you made at Burmese monasteries or pagodas or other Buddhist sites when you were in that kind of reflective and meditative frame of mind, which particular sketches and scenes stand out in what you were able to record from those times?
So in Myanmar, I spent a couple of days in Yangon actually, and then the rest of the time, like the 3 weeks, I was at the monastery in Pa Auk Toya, and I did in the last 3 days I did some drawings there, and actually tried to be a bit representative of my experience there, like to draw each kind of place I was spending most of my time in, the room I was living in, and because it was a very interesting room, like everything was made of wood, even the bed, just wood. And
Mm-hmm.
there was this kind of drawing with the path, the whole path that was stitched there, like the meditative path, and was on the wall, on the door. And it was an interesting frame, like um, you have all the all everything in front of you, and you just have to sit in that room. And maybe the monks' kutis, when where they were living, a bit from the meditation hall, and there are some little details that stand out to me, like the mosquito nets. They have in the
Mm-hmm.
meditation hall, each meditator have a cushion and a reserved place, and with a mosquito net that was really like a cocoon. You have some privacy, even though it was a really big meditation hall, and sometimes quite noisy some days. But you have this personal space, and you felt secluded just because you had this net around you. I actually did a painting with those, inspired by those mosquito nets. There was also many dogs that were living at the monastery. And you could hear them at night, like howling far away, like around the uh, the forest around the monastery. And I drew the dogs too. Um, the sleepers, uh, in the morning, when the monks were going to eat, because it was really big monastery. It was maybe, I don't know, around 800 monks were living there, and some lay people to maybe 20. I'm not sure, that were doing the retreat, and you couldn't know how many monks was there, only at when everyone came to eat, and you could see the sleepers just all around the kitchen, the refectory place, and it was really interesting view. And some monks sitting with a bowl at the table in the kitchen. It's I mean, it's visually interesting that they have
Mm-hmm.
to eat only from one bowl, that all the food, and it's kind of almost like a bell, like a like bronze bell.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, things like that. And in the city, maybe I really enjoyed around the Shwedagon Pagoda. It was a really lively place. It was like also obviously a religious and very important pilgrimage site, but there's a lot of life, normal life happening around. Like people were eating or talking or around the pagoda. It was where you could see everything there. was really full of life, the place. And people are praying, some are meditating, some are sleeping, some are taking photographs,
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, and this was something I noticed as well looking at your sketches, especially the ones that really called to me, of course, were the ones you did in Myanmar, just because that's the environment I'm so accustomed to, especially the monastic sketches that you did. I was really intrigued by those. And I was intrigued by just the kind of normal rhythms and flows of life and things that you see and things that happen that you were able to capture into a frame. And in many times I had this feeling that some of the things that are happening in the periphery or on the side of that daily life in Myanmar, you made the centerpiece. So, for example, the the sandals that are around the trees that
yeah,
people
yeah.
step out of when they go to the Dhamma halls, this is something that you might see in the periphery of a picture. You might see a picture of people or of a pagoda or scenery, and then in the background, you just kind of happen to notice these sandals sitting there, and you made that the focus of what you're doing. So you're in some ways the things that you're focusing on are unusual or the features that are not usually standing out, and you make them stand out by your focus on them. These include, sandals by the tree. You talked about that. You talk about the monk eating from his bowl alone. That also caught me, just a monk engrossed and focused on the act of eating. And another one that caught my attention was the nuns that are waiting for the bus. Very
Mm.
nondescript pictures, nothing really unusual or startling or eye-catching that's happening, just really a feature of daily life. Nuns just sitting on the corner waiting for a bus to arrive. You capture that. And also at Shredagon, you mentioned you did sketches there, but I think what one might think of going to, one of the most holy and famous religious sites in the world, that you would capture kind of the gargantuan and magnificent and spectacular parts of the pagoda that everyone captures when they go, whether it's video or photograph or artwork or whatever. But instead you capture scenes again that are kind of off to the side, a family that is sitting there enjoying their meal or having their conversation, or a monk that's resting, or sometimes even the way you're framing the sketches, you're not even seeing the whole scene or the background or the context or the whole figure. You're just seeing parts of a couple of different things juxtaposed together. So was that also intentional in terms of when you were looking at and thinking about, what do I want to make a sketch of all these things happening in life and before me, I'm going to choose to focus on these aspects and not those. So as you during that decision making process, are you more focused on those things in the peripheries of life rather than the big, more obvious, magnificent parts of whatever's in front of you that most people might be more drawn to and making the centerpiece of their images?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of meaning, and you can read a lot in details like this. And for example, with the sandals, it's this kind of respect that in Myanmar everyone takes off the shoes and takes off the sandals when they go inside, maybe a meditation hall, for example. And you can see a sense of community that happens in that kind of place where everyone is kind of together, and it's a bit symbolized like with the sandals going together. And I don't know how they recognize, because all of them look the same, how they knew which one is which.
Right.
um, and yeah, I mean, I think these kind of details are the most interesting the most suggestive to to see. And maybe sometimes the relationship between this kind of grandiose architecture and with the mythological. I had one with a elephant, like a sculpted giant elephant, and it was monk sleeping with the fan near on
Mhm.
on, on its foot. Or yeah, I think you can imagine a lot of background of this kind of stories, like how did that moment came to be,
Mhm.
what is the story behind it, what yeah, and it can suggest many things. And Yeah, actually, I wish I could catch many more this kind of scenes, but it's difficult, because it's very sometimes it happens very fast.
Mm.
I have one with the meditation pillow where I was sitting in the meditation hall, and at the same time during the evening, the light was really almost touching the pillow where I was sitting, and it was really
Mm.
interesting kind of scene. And
Mm.
it suggests like the passage of time and how much you
Oh, right.
can spend in that place, because the light keeps on coming back and then going
Right.
away and then coming back.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's interesting about capturing the familiar instead of the spectacular is that when people when different people are looking at your art, whether or not they have an experience in that place, they're drawn to more the specific nature of the feeling of something on the outskirts. And so what I'm thinking of, for example, is like I don't know how many scenes I've seen of Shwedagon Pagoda, how many videos, how many pictures, how many different artworks. And they all start to kind of run a bit similar in terms of the magnificent structure that's being painted. You think about like the Eiffel Tower, or the Taj Mahal, or the Golden Gate Bridge. If you physically been to any of these monuments, any of these famous places around the world, and then you see a picture of them, the pictures all kind of start to run together. They all are showing different parts of this magnificent, obvious structure in front of you. But instead of showing the obvious scene at Shwedagon everyone sees, if you're able to focus on some small aspect which is not an unknown, on the contrary, it could be. I mean, that's certainly one way you can go about it, is to find, I want to find the view of Shwedagon that no one's ever really seen before, and that people are going to look at and say, oh, that's Shwedagon? I had no idea. That's certainly one way to go about it. That's not the way you do it. Another way to go about it, which is how I see your sketches going, is that you're recording something around Shwedagon that's so obvious and so familiar and so commonplace that you almost stop seeing it. You almost stop realizing it's there, because it's just all around you every moment. As I said, it's the periphery, it's the background, it's the thing you don't notice. And by making that the centerpiece of your picture, that of the sketch, that is where the viewer's attention starts to come. And if you've not been to that place, then it gives you some sense of what it must feel like, and capturing some of these quotidian scenes. But when you have been to the place, it immediately takes you there, and realize, you see a family sitting around Shwedagon, and just the way you capture their body language and their posture and their facial expression and some of the background scene of Shwedagon, you think, I've seen that woman a dozen times. Or the way you might capture one of those hanging mosquito nets that hover above a meditator at many monasteries there. The way that's captured, it's like, well, wait a second, I've seen this exact mosquito net. I've seen this, at least 24 different times in my experience at these monasteries. So they really call out to you these familiar quotidian objects. They call out to you and familiarize a sense of the known in a way that the more obvious painted and depicted scenes probably don't.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's also because of the traveler's mentality. Because for me, they were not so familiar scenes actually, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm from a very different culture, and
Mm-hmm.
even though if you live there a long time, you get used to these scenes maybe. But to me, it's really interesting detail that I haven't seen before, and. But you can do that. You can train that to do that even in normal life. When I live
Right.
here in Romania, I can look with a fresh eye at things that are common and familiar, but it become interesting if you really pay attention. And I mean that's almost like a meditative practice. Like
Sure.
if you pay a lot of attention to something, it will become interesting. Whatever you do, it will become interesting. Just through this
Mm.
continuous attention.
So you referenced being from Romania, and one of the things I want to ask about is the current crisis that Myanmar is going through. And I know for me, when the crisis started and suddenly there was this terrible military dictatorship that was oppressing and overturning a democratic and free society, or a somewhat democratic and somewhat free society, as in the case of Myanmar, that it was kind of unprecedented for me in knowing where do I fit into this? How do I respond? What do I do in this kind of context? Coming from an American society, which doesn't necessarily have that history of dictators and of widespread oppression, at least in my lifetime and the lifetime of those around me. In Romania, of course, you had Ceausescu, and you did have a dictator that was there. I think that might have been a little bit before your time, but probably not before the time of the older generations and the stories
Yeah.
that you heard and the growing out of the Cold War and the dictator environment into being more of a free society. So uh, it, as you were following the news, the terrible news that was coming out of Myanmar and the oppression that was coming back, I didn't have any context for this. I didn't have any understanding for what this must feel like and how it is to live like this. But as you were following the news, did you feel that you had any context or parallels or comparisons to the stories you had heard before about what your own country recently emerged from?
Yeah, actually, I was born just before communism fell and Ceausescu fell in and actually it did remind me when I traveled in Myanmar. The country reminded me a bit of my country after the dictatorship, when it
Mm,
tried to do this transition to democracy. And because it was a kind of, it's very hard to pinpoint exactly what, but it had this kind of same energy, like was changing very fast, and it was
mhm.
some hope. And I mean, I didn't have spend so much time, but just this is my impression at that moment. And yeah, things were beginning to change for the better at that time. But no, it's very hard to keep a democracy. I mean,
Yeah.
after so many decades
Mhm.
of dictatorship, and in my country as well. I mean, it's had maybe 20 years to really become democratic and free, and
Mhm.
was period. No, we're not so bad like is happening now in Myanmar, but we had some periods in the 90s where things were degrading again, and was protests that were crushed, not with army but with miners. It was called the
Mhm.
mineriads. They called yeah, they manipulated some workers to crush the protests. And yeah, it's difficult to build, because it's not just about institutions and I mean the right to vote. It's also like a culture, and that everyone kind of has respects about the freedom of others, and yeah, freedom of speech. And I mean, it's a habit that have everyone kind of gradually begins to incorporate, and it's easy to lose that, I guess. If also if the context is not good, like international, and they're not supported by other countries. Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I hope it. I mean, things will turn for the better for Myanmar, but it's very hard. Um,
Right. One of the features of an opening country that was true of Romania, true of Myanmar during the transition, is you suddenly have access, and this is especially true in the modern age, you suddenly have access to new opportunities, information, styles, influences that you simply didn't have when the country was closed. And,
yeah, yeah.
certainly we saw that in the transition period. I have a very good friend from Czech Republic, and he came of age just as Czech was coming out of their dark years. And it was just so, and my friend, as he was coming of age, 2021 or so at the time, he immediately took off to, India and Nepal and
Mm,
Africa and all these different places. And it was so interesting visiting with him around that time and seeing, or not around that time, but some years later, and just kind of seeing the older generations that just had no understanding or access to this outside world, and this
mm,
younger guy who was just drinking it up. And then as I got to know him in later years, seeing what that influence did to him, going to these different parts of the world, what he brought back with them and how it changed his worldview. And in the case of Romania, of course, these opportunities also came during that time. You mentioned your age, and so you would have been you would have had probably some memory of those new experiences and things starting to come. And
Yeah.
with that would have been Buddhism, would have been the opportunity to learn Buddhist meditation, to read Buddhist books, to attend Buddhist retreats. And so
Yeah.
talk a bit about the presence of Buddhism coming to Romania in the context of Romania itself coming out of a dark period, and where you fit in with finding an interest in Buddhist teachers and teachings and retreats.
Mm. So for the first part, I remember when I traveled for the first time abroad, my country. Maybe I was like 14 years old, something like that. And actually, it was really striking for me because I think you don't realize that when you live in a country that there is some collective trauma, for almost all population that lived
Mm-hmm.
after in a such a long period of dictatorship. And when I went abroad, I really realized that I felt that people are different, more kind of relaxed, more trusting, maybe more kind of knowing that they are respected and knowing that they can trust this, maybe it's to some extent the state. But in Romania, and it's not. I mean, it's the little details that kind of remain for people. And you see, like people are when they have to stay in line somewhere to wait a bus, they are kind of spreading and they are all going together, like because they are afraid of losing their place. Just small things like that. If you feel that it's something behind this, like a deeper than um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and but things, of course, is changed. But for all older generation, I think it's still a bit there, like this the kind of memory of the periods of dictatorship and when they couldn't really trust each other so much because there was the secret service that was we didn't know who could be in the secret service
Mm-hmm.
to follow them and so on. And yeah, and also the poverty, the lack of opportunity. And for Buddhism, it was, yeah, I consider myself very lucky to have this opportunity to. For me, it was connected a lot with the appearance of internet, and
Mm-hmm.
I kind of started meditating after following a monk, a Canadian monk called Yutadamo Bhikkhu. Maybe you heard of him. He's quite popular. He has a channel on YouTube, and he is in a tradition of Mahasi Sayadaw.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the first time I really consider that it's a possibility to do this. I read about Buddhism before, but
Mm-hmm.
it felt a bit theoretical. It was like more philosophical, which I was very attracted to, but I didn't know that I can do it. Yeah, it's like still possible
Right.
to cultivate this and to do it like in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And and then yeah, to really know about different teachers and to read books. You can order books online and read about pretty much everything you want and attend retreats and travel. And I mean, it's amazing in this
Mm-hmm.
respect. And yeah, I mean, the internet has its flaws, but it's also a great opportunity if you can use it well.
And so then, having come from this background of being interested in Buddhism and getting deeper and deeper into Buddhist theory and teachings, and especially the practice and the meditation, coming to Southeast Asia and coming to Myanmar, particularly, what were your experiences like in going through with the meditation here in this more native environment with much deeper roots?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was really intense
Hmm.
period I mean, all of the retreats were, but this one is even more because it was a bit longer. It was the
Hmm.
longest I did. I did 10 weeks only before.
Hmm.
10 weeks, 10 days. Sorry. Um, and yeah, and also the practice of just concentration. Most of it I was uh, trying to focus on the breath, the sensation
Hmm.
of breath at the tip of the nose. This was the first teaching, and I kind of came a bit naive, like with maybe too much expectations,
Hmm.
to really learn the first jhana. That was my goal, I say. And but even so, I mean, even if you don't try to do insight meditation, it really comes naturally after a while, and you start realizing a lot of things about yourself and the nature of experience, maybe. Um, and yeah, the rhythm of the monastery is really special. To um, it's interesting that compared to a normal retreat, you're not so um, taken care of. Like, you're a bit on your own. You have to have your own
Right.
practice. You know the
Yeah.
program of the monastery is, but you're not like uh, a student, special student who that the teacher is there for you all the time, and
Hmm.
you have to just follow the program of the monastery and try to learn on yourself to get over the difficulties by yourself most of the time. And there are some really interesting things that stick to me. One of them is really the way the things that were happening in common, like the meal time.
Hmm.
It's the way everyone stood in line and just waited for for the
Hmm.
meal, and people came from the villages around almost every day, like villagers that probably most of them were quite poor, I guess.
Hmm.
And they offer us, which were like foreign meditators, um, every day, like food and sometimes flowers even, and it was
Hmm.
quite touching, to
Hmm.
see people happy to help, like uh, this practice, like to support our practice,
Hmm.
even if we're not related in any way. And yeah, I remember it was this kind of very old lady, was very frail, and she was coming very often then, and she just came with condiments, like curry, and just put some condiments in our food. It was
Hmm.
very, very nice. Yeah, and then just the whole atmosphere, the sound in the morning of the wood that was the call for meditation.
Hmm. Yeah.
I don't know how it's called, the instrument. It was not a bell.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Gong,
gong. Yeah. Um, yeah,
like a
walking
hollowed
around.
out piece of wood that every
E-
monastery has.
Exactly, but because the monastery was in a kind of mountain region, and it was
Yeah.
the echo really went so
Hmm.
far. It was like,
Hmm.
wow.
Yeah. They even have a certain rhythm of how frequent they bang it, and it gets more and more frequent, and then suddenly they're banging it really hard, and then they start to have greater intervals again in it. There's a whole protocol that
Mm,
happens any monastery in the country like that.
yeah, yeah, it was quite musical in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the meditation hall, and everyone in the evening they did some chanting. The I didn't, of course, I didn't understand it, but the atmosphere was very, very nice because it was very dark. It was like you could feel the hall was very big, and you could feel voices everywhere, like this kind of dark space.
Hmm.
And there are many, and you kind of because you're in that state, that meditative state, and everything is much more intense. Every sensation, every sound, yeah, everything is becomes very interesting.
Mm.
And even the little detail is really and I mean, but the meditation practice can be quite challenging and difficult. The beginning was really difficult, the first week for me, but then it went more with the flow and
Hmm.
went better and better. Um, yeah, and there were some strange experiences that I didn't have before with meditation, but I didn't realize my goal of entering the first jhana, I think. But
Mm.
I mean, I was not like, it's okay.
Hmm.
Um,
So you now have done various meditations associated with Ajahn Chah, Sayadaw U Tejaniya, Pa Auk system, Mahasi Sayadaw, perhaps some others as well. Where does your practice fit in now? What have you gravitated towards, and what works for you in terms of how you want to practice?
well, it depends on I mean, in retreats, I usually follow the teachings of the retreat. But in
Hmm.
normal life, I have a regular meditation practice. I try maybe now in the last year was not so intense, maybe half hour a day. But And I also like a lot kind of open awareness lately, to just let the awareness sit on everything that, to be open to everything that happens in your experience, and
Yeah.
just let it be, and not try to guide it so much.
Hmm.
But sometimes I want to do breath, focus on breathing, and kind of collect the attention more.
Hmm.
So it depends. I mean, it depends on maybe the mood,
Yeah.
maybe how I think is useful at that point.
Mm.
But I also
Right.
like to maybe take 10 minutes just from time to time, like every 2 hours, and just sit 10 minutes to
Mm.
meditate. It is
Hmm.
really useful for me. This kind of reminding myself that it's kind of the whole day has to be
Mm.
kind of with awareness, not just the sitting
Right.
practice.
Yeah. One of the things that some meditators will say when they come to Burma is that they benefit not just from the prescribed teachings and the courses and the technique, but they benefit in ways they never would have imagined from the external society, and just being in a Buddhist community, and the way that viewing interactions in the monastery or outside the monastery between people or various influences. Were there, in your time that you spent in Myanmar in monastic environments, as well as outside and traveling and meeting people, were there certain aspects or facets of Burmese culture that stood out to you and that influenced you beyond the mere practice of a technique?
Mhm. So I think one of the things is just the seriousness, the
Mm.
seriousness that the meditation practice and spiritual practice in general is viewed with. I mean, and this has some impact on you psychologically, if you know that you feel that everyone is
Hmm.
respecting this and thinks it's very important. This, I mean, you don't have in my country, for example. Is something, yeah, maybe it's a bit strange, or
Yeah.
maybe just kind of relaxation method, but it's not viewed so with such intensity.
Hmm.
And yeah, the rhythm, I guess, like the life is in a way um, follows kind of. You see monks in the morning with, and it reminds you that this exists, and it's
Yeah.
happening, and it has some weight to it, like that a lot of time has passed from the when the Buddha gave the teachings, and this is still here. And this habit, for example, with the monks with the alms bowl in the morning, is still happening after all this time.
Hmm.
And yeah, there are many things like this. um, and also the art. I mean, because I'm an artist, really sensitive to art, and to
Yeah.
kind of the way, yeah, art kind of encourages you to have some experiences, or to do some things, to
Hmm.
yeah, suggest something, and Buddhist art suggests some specific things, like the pagodas have have this shape of like a cylinder, and then like a spiral in
Hmm.
the head, and it has some, I don't know, elation. It kind of mm, it's very difficult to explain exactly what, but
Hmm.
it resonates with me. And yeah, the serenity of the sculptures of the Buddha, maybe the whole atmosphere in the temples. Mm. I liked a lot also in Thailand. The interior of the temples was really cozy, like
Mm.
with carpet, and it was
Yeah.
really kind of very natural to just sit and meditate in the temple. It was not something very, formal, or
Mm.
is. I mean, in my country, the churches have some more, I don't know how to say, more seriousness. I
Hmm.
mean, kind of something more heavy sometimes. Like you have to be really, uh, I, yeah, it's not so inviting maybe sometimes. Yeah, there are many things like that, I think.
Mm. Yeah, speaking of Thailand, one of the sketches in your collection that really stood out from all the other scenes that you were collecting was the image that you drew of the red light district in Bangkok. Can you describe to the audience what that picture is, what that sketch is, and the obvious emotions and body languages that you're depicting on the girls, and what drew you to kind of go outside, or at least the way I see it, go outside a bit of the norms of the things that you were drawing, and this seems like something of an outlier. What led you to want to sketch this and include that in the collection?
Yeah, I mean, in especially in Thailand, I did a lot of drawings also of kind of daily life, and
Mm,
that is kind of part of it, part of the yeah, it's part of the truth of that what is happening right there. You
sure.
know, it's
Yeah.
part of what um, yeah, and yeah, maybe the way I drew it, it was they look very kind of sad, and the girls, on the street, like
Mm,
lined up, and no, it's maybe more subjective. It's not like they really look like that necessarily, but
mm.
yeah, it's part of life. Yeah, that's it's not. I mean, I was not judgmental or something like
Sure.
that, but yeah, it's part of yeah of the city.
You
And
know, they look very scared and vulnerable and protecting themselves, and it was quite striking in terms of the just the, at least for me, the emotions that I saw that
Mhm.
captured that. And you're right, it is a part of life. It, especially in Thailand, for those who haven't been in that part of the world, it's not like as in Western countries that
Yeah,
you
yeah.
go to a certain street in a certain part of town that there's only one reason why you would go there, and you're going there for this fix of, some combination of girls or drugs or crime or whatever else. In Thailand, you have these kind of red light parts of life, just right downtown and on the same streets as anything else. And so it's just to give that context for those that haven't been there. As you're walking from here to there, you very easily might pass by some types of these establishments.
Yeah, I mean, I never seen in Europe something like this. Like
Yeah,
maybe in Amsterdam, but not even there.
yeah.
It's the entire streets that all of them with uh, how to say bars and with many girls outside dressed almost naked.
Mm.
Yeah.
Right. There certainly is a wide and diverse collection of your sketches, both from Myanmar, from Southeast Asian countries, and elsewhere, showing these kind of daily rhythms and familiarities of life being in those places. Of course, for you, not so familiar if you're an outsider and there's something new, but really kind of capturing the daily essence of life and the things that are outside of the normal framing of pictures and places. So for those that are interested in seeing more about your work and following you, where can they do so?
Well, I have a Instagram page, and it's Dragos Badita .studio. I also have a website with my name, dragosbadita.com.
Hmm.
I guess those are the best places to see.
Yeah, and we'll link those in the show notes as well when they come out, and definitely encourage listeners to follow along and see some of that. And thank you so much for taking the time to
Uh,
join us and have a wide ranging conversation.
Thanks a lot for inviting me, and yeah, I hope things will be better in the future for the country. Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode. As regular listeners are aware, we often remind our audience about our nonprofit mission, Better Burma, at the end of a show. Truth be told, fundraising is hard work, and I can personally attest to the fact that it's really no fun to keep asking for contributions. Yet, the situation on the ground now in Myanmar is so distressing that we continue to do so on behalf of the Burmese people. What is most helpful at this time are recurring donations, which help alleviate both the stress and time involved in fundraising. If you are able to pledge a certain amount per month, our team can plan around having at least a consistent minimum amount to work within each month. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go on to support a wide range of humanitarian and media missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, refugee camps, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution to a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause in both websites except credit card. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to these respective accounts or email us at info@betterburma.org. That's Better Burma, one word, spelled BETTERBURMA.org. If you would like to give it another way, please contact us. We also invite you to check out our range of handicrafts that are sourced from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar, available at alokacrafts.com. Any purchase will not only support these artisan communities, but also our nonprofit's wider mission. That's Aloka Crafts, spelled ALOKACRAFTS, one word, alokacrafts.com. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.
Oba yarananda dayananga yaranaya dayanam boda yaranamno